be able to post the recording online. And before we get started, I just kind of wanted to make sure that everyone here is in the right place. So the purpose of this workshop is really to help those that are getting ready to file for post-completion OPT with USCIS. So the expectation is that everyone that is here should have already taken our OPT online workshop. That is a required step to actually apply for OPT. So the purpose of this workshop is really to kind of walk through the I-765 government form and to talk about the documents you'll be putting in your application filing and talking about what happens after filing. So we're not really going to go into the fine point details on what is OPT and all the specific timing matters. That will be covered in our online workshop. So in terms of what we'll actually be covering today, we will briefly touch on just the general OPT filing timelines. Like I said, we are actually going to walk in detail through the government form and really just kind of cover some of those commonly asked questions about the government form. We're going to go over some common issues that we see with the OPT and how to avoid those problems. We'll cover implications of international travel on OPT, talk about some of those OPT reporting requirements, health insurance requirements on OPT, and lastly, we'll cover what you need to do if you end up abandoning or ending your OPT status. If any of you have questions during the presentation, please don't hesitate to ask them. The way to do that is to actually use the chat function, and we'll kind of monitor those questions throughout the presentation. Okay, so in terms of when you are actually filing the OPT application, it's important to remember that the USCIS only allows the OPT application to be filed up to 90 days before your I-20 program end date. In terms of what your I-20 program end date is going to be, it's typically going to be the last day of the last month of your enrollment here at the university. If you are a PhD candidate, you do have a little more flexibility in your I-20 end date in that you can also ask for it to be shortened to your anticipated defense date. Just remember, whatever your I-20 end date ends up being, it will shorten your on-campus work authorization, which does include any authorizations for a GSI or GSRA appointment. I think a lot of you probably might have I-20 end dates in the future, so if you are graduating early ahead of what's on your I-20 end date, just keep in mind that the end date will be shortened to your last term of enrollment as part of the OPT I-20 process. So for example, if your end date is April 30th, 2021 on your I-20, but fall 2020 is actually your last term of enrollment, as part of that OPT process, we're going to shorten your I-20 end date to December 31 of 2020. In terms of when you can actually start the OPT, you will let us know with the OPT I-20 the start date you'd like to request, but keep in mind that you can only request an OPT start date that is within the 60-day grace period following your I-20 end date. So in the example where you have a December 31 end date, your available start dates you can request your OPT to begin are between January 1 to March 1. Those dates are inclusive, meaning that you can request the January 1 or March 1 start date as well. So before we get started with reviewing the I-765 form, some important things that I would just like to highlight. It's really, really important that all of you are reading the USCIS instructions for I-765, and it's posted on the same link here where you can actually access the I-765 form. For those of you that aren't already aware, we've already posted a copy of this presentation on our website. It's on the events page where you actually registered for this workshop. So you can go back and refer to that presentation at any time to access these online links. I'd like to highlight, while there's many pages of instructions for the I-765, it is important that you read through them. Not all of the sections will apply to you, so you can always skim through the non-applicable sections, but they give pretty detailed instructions on how you should be filling out the form, so that's super helpful. And if you do need more assistance, I do want to bring your attention to our University of Michigan suggestions for completing the I-765 as well. So give me a moment. I am actually just going to switch screens and pull up the I-765 form. Okay, so hopefully all of you can now see the government form. So this is the form that you will all be completing. And it's really important to make sure you're using the most recent edition date. So currently the most recent edition of the I-765 form is dated August 25th, 2020. And you can find that information on the lower left-hand corner of the form. And the way to really make sure you're using the current form is to actually access the form directly from the USCIS website. So don't just save it on your computer and access it later. Just get it directly from the government website. And the reason why that's important is that the government does update the form every once in a while. They were actually going to release an October 2nd version of the form with a corresponding fee increase. All of that has been put on hold due to pending lawsuits with the government. So for now, it is currently the August 25th edition. So in terms of where to start on the form, so basically you just start where it says start here. Ignore this box, select this box if Form G28 is only applicable if you are utilizing an immigration attorney to help file the application. And I will say that's quite unusual, not that you can't, but the form is pretty straightforward. So most of our students do just do this on their own. One thing to note, we strongly recommend that you are typing the form when at all possible. There may be some boxes that you won't be able to type in, and if that happens, certainly you can handwrite some information in. If you do that, it's really important that you're using black ink. Typically, other ink colors will be rejected. And just make sure that your handwriting is legible. So it'll be super, super neat if you absolutely have to write something on your own. So let's get started. All of you for 1A are going to check initial permission to accept employment. And then as you scroll down, you are then filling out your full legal name as it appears on your passport. Now, some of you might not necessarily have, for example, a middle name. What the government instructions are, basically they're saying for any box that does not apply to you, they want you to put not applicable. If it's a numerical response, you might not necessarily be able to put, depending on the box, you might not be able to put that special slash in there. So the government does indicate you can also put none, N-O-N-E, as well. I would say one of the most common questions we get regarding the I-765 form are, there's so many boxes that don't apply to me. Do I have to put N-A in every single one of those boxes? And our response is yes, and that's simply because that's what the government instructions tell you to do. Do I think it's necessarily going to have a negative impact on your application if you forgot to put NA in a box? I don't. But at the same time, if the government wanted to be difficult about it, they could choose to do that. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of fill out this form as if I were filling out the application myself, and I'm not going to do everything, but if you go to 2A, this section is if you have any other names that you're using. So for example, if you're married and you have a maiden name, this is where you would list that out. And also, basically, if you have used another name that is documented somewhere. So if you just have an informal nickname, maybe your friends use that with you, but it's not documented in writing anywhere or on any other document, you don't need to use that. But if you have a preferred name, and I would actually even say if you have a preferred name listed in the University of Michigan system that you use, that's not a bad idea. It never hurts to actually put in those other names here. If you don't have any other names that you're using for yourself, then you would simply put NA in actually all of these boxes. And in the interest of time, I'm not actually going to fill all those boxes out, but you would actually fill it out through 4C. Okay, so I would say part 2, question 5 is going to be one of the most important questions in the application, and that's the U.S. mailing address. So I would say that the #1 issue we see with OPT applications pertains to the mailing address. Whatever address you put here, this is the address where all of the documents pertaining to your OPT application will be mailed to by the USCIS. We do strongly recommend whatever address you're using in this box that it is an address that's valid for at least 6 months. And the reason why we're indicating 6 months is that it can take the government currently anywhere between 2 to 5 months to process your OPT application. And then from date of approval, it may take a couple weeks for them to actually mail you the EAD card in the mail. So by selecting an address that's not changing for 6 months, you're pretty much covered in terms of all the documentation the government will be mailing you. I would say one of the most common questions we get here is, I'm graduating, I'm moving, I have no idea where I'm going to be living. In that situation, we strongly recommend that you're selecting, if possible, the address of a friend or relative in the United States that is not moving over the next 6 months, since you can use someone's address here that is not your own as the mailing address. It's just really important. If you're using someone else's address in the in care of name, you should put your friend or relative's full legal name listed in 5A. If it's your own address, then you can just you could just put NA. Okay. The one thing I'd like to mention, even though it is possible to change your address with the pending application, we strongly advise against that. I will say that the government is not great about timely syncing up that address update with the pending OPT. So what we commonly see, even if you timely update your address with the government, we often see that EAD being mailed to the old address, which is what we're trying to avoid here. If you really don't have a friend or relative in the US that you can rely on for that mailing address, one thing you may want to consider as well, the government does allow sending the EAD to a PO box. So you could potentially set up a post office box with your local post office where all of your documentation could be mailed to as well. So moving on, if your current mailing address is not where you're actually living at this point in time, you're going to select no, and then you would type in your actual address in the US physical address in item 7A. If you are living where your mailing address is, you would simply select yes for item 6. And I will say, if you select yes for item 6, so this is a case where I can't actually type in anything in question 7. Once I print the form, what I would probably do is I would actually go in and write NA in 7A through 7D. If item 5 is my actual mailing address and I'm living there. Okay. So moving on to item 8, alien registration number. Most of you, this is going to be a not applicable box. Since it's a numerical entry, I'm writing none in here, but it really doesn't matter. If you wanted to write NA, you could do that as well. The alien number, you would only have an alien number if you are far enough along in the green card process, or alternatively, if you've obtained an OPT EAD card as well, you might have an alien number listed on that card, and you could certainly put that in this box here. Same thing for item 9. Most of you are not going to have a USCIS online account number, so I'm just putting none here. I would highly encourage all of you to open up a USCIS account, which you could do on the uscis.gov website. but you won't actually be assigned an account number until you actually have a pending application. So once again, most of you, it's going to be none for item 9. Items 10 and 11, you should just answer the most appropriate answer. Item 12, have you ever filed Form I-765? If you've had an OPT before, or even a different type of I-765, like a green card employment authorization application, you would select yes here. If you've had CPT before, that's not an I-765 form. So if the only type of work authorization you've ever had is CPT, you've never filed I-765 before, you would select no for this box. Okay.
Monica?
Yes.
Sorry, one student asked, what physical address should I use if I'm taking classes remotely outside of the US?
Sure. So for item 5, mailing address and the physical address, one thing to keep in mind, both must be a US address. So I think, Ploy, you said the question was for physical address?
Yes, physical address,
Physical address.
And if the student is currently outside
Sure.
of the US.
Okay. So even if you're currently outside of the US, you are required to maintain a US address for the purposes of maintaining active F1 status. So there's a couple different options on what you could list for US physical address. My first recommendation would be if you actually have the address of a friend or relative you can use in the United States, that would be preferred. But otherwise, you can simply use whatever your last US physical address was in the United States and leave that be. The one thing I would like to note, though, for OPT application, the government does expect that you are physically present in the United States for the filing of the OPT application, meaning when you're mailing it and when it's received by the government, you should be physically present. Unfortunately, with the whole COVID-19 circumstance, the government hasn't announced any special exceptions to that requirement, so that is something to keep in mind. If you're not physically present in the US, and you plan to apply for OPT, we strongly recommend that you do everything you can do to actually physically return to the US for the filing of the application, since the government does have the discretion to deny the application if you're not physically present. But like I said, listing the address of a friend or relative in the US would be an acceptable option, or just the old address. Okay. So moving on to, and feel free to keep chiming in, Ploy, if you see other questions. Moving on to item 13A. So if you've ever had a social security number assigned to you, you would indicate yes here. And if you have not had a social security number assigned to you, you would indicate no. So depending on what you answer here, if you have a social security number, you simply enter it in 13B. If you do not, I would enter none in 13B. So if you already have a social security number, you should be selecting no for item 14. You don't need a social security card. If you need a social security number, so if you don't have one, then you're entering yes. Okay, so let's pretend that you do need to apply for a social security number. I do recommend that you select yes here. It's going to be a lot more streamlined to file for your social security number at the same time of your OPT, since it basically saves you a trip to the social security office. Everything is instead done via mail, and your card will be mailed to you.
Sorry, I have a quick question. What if I already applied for the Social Security card, but I haven't received it yet?
So if you've already applied, I would actually indicate no, that you would, let me see here. I would actually just hit no. The whole purpose of item 13A is to determine whether or not you need to apply for a Social Security card. You can hit no if you haven't been issued the Social Security card. If you haven't been issued the number yet, you can hit none. But in item 14A, you can also indicate No, you don't need the Social Security Administration to issue you a card,
Okay.
because it will be coming. Okay. And if
Thank you.
anyone else, oh, you're welcome. For further questions, if you could all also use the chat function, just because of all the participants we have, Ploy's pretty great at monitoring those chat functions as well.
Monica,
Yes.
is there a time frame for physical address that needs to be valid?
No, the U.S. mailing address, we recommend 6 months. The physical address, there is not a time frame. Basically, the government just wants to know the physical address at the time of filing. But if they're moving, that's fine as well. And do remember to continue to update your physical address in Wolverine Access within 10 days of any move. By updating the address in Wolverine Access, that does also update the government CVIS record. Okay. So if you're a number with the OPT application, it's important that you hit yes to item 15, authorizing the Social Security Administration to SSN. If you don't need a Social Security number, then you're leaving 15 blank, and you're skipping down to item 18A. And this is if you already have a Social Security number. And you could also put NA here, since these items don't apply to you if you already have an SSN in 16 and 17. So all of you will need to complete item 18A, country of citizenship. If you have more than one, just make sure to list all of those countries out here. Place of birth, you should enter the relevant information. I want to highlight item 20 for all of you. This is unfortunately a common error. One, it's super important that you are indicating your correct birth date, since that will be printed on the EAD card. But also, one thing to remember, the US is very unusual in that our month date format is pretty much different than every other country. So just remember that we have the month first and then date. And that will be really important to pay attention to. So I just made up a fake birth date. So if I'm writing this date in here, this would be read as June 7th, 1999, not July 6th, 1999. For item 21A, you should put your I-94 number as it appears on your I-94 record, which you can retrieve online. For passport number, you just copy whatever is listed on your most recent passport. So I know a lot of you are probably going to have a visa that was issued in an older passport. Don't list the number of your older passport. Whatever your most recent passport is issued to you, that's the passport number that you should be using. 21C is not going to apply to most of you. Most of you, it's simply going to be NA. Perhaps if you have a pending green card application, you might have an advanced parole document you could list here, but other than that, you should really just put NA right there. Country that issued your passport, you would fill out in 21D. And once again, for the expiration dates, just be mindful of the date format. Okay, so question 22, date of your last arrival into the United States. You can, if you don't remember, I would definitely recommend checking your I-94 record. Most of you, your I-94 record should reflect your last date of entry. The only exception that we really see is if you were in Canada for 30 days or less, the government is not required to issue or update your I-94 record for just short trips to Canada. If that's the case, your last date of entry should actually still be in the travel history of the I-94 page, but not on the I-94 record itself. So if your I-94 record does not indicate your last date of arrival into the US and you didn't go into Canada, then I would just recommend shoot us an email at icenter@umich.edu, and we're happy to take a look to see what's going on, and we can give you some instructions on how to get that updated as well. The one thing I will say, if you're applying for OPT and you see an issue with your I-94 last date of entry, there's no need to delay your OPT I-20 process. You can go ahead and kind of submit everything as is, and at the same time, we can help you get that I-94 updated or look into what the issue may be. For item 23, your last place of arrival into the United States. So typically that's going to be the airport that you went. If you don't remember, two places. Your I-94 travel history should have a 3-letter code that corresponds to the airport or your port of entry that you entered. So a lot of times we see Detroit Airport listed 2 ways. We sometimes see it as listed DTW or DET. In terms of what you're putting here, you can either put the 3-letter code, since that is a Customs and Border Protection designation, so they understand what those codes are, or you could even write out the place where you last entered. Some of you, your port of entry code is going to be for an city that is not actually in the United States. So there are a couple places around the world where U.S. Customs and Border Protection actually does the pre-clearance inspection outside of the United States. So for example, sometimes we see TOR for Toronto. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection does have a pre-clearance facility in Canada. So if it's something like that, it would be perfectly fine for you to put Toronto, Canada as your last place of arrival into the U.S. if that's where you actually went through U.S. Customs.
Monica?
Yes.
One student asked, where can I find the port of entry code?
Sure. So for all of you on the I-94 website, let me see here. If you just, I don't remember it off the top of my head, but if you just Google I-94, and you're going to see the website, it's like cbp.gov. That's the I-94 website. You have to put in your passport information, your legal name as it appears on your passport, and it will pull up your I-94 record. On that same page, there's going to be a tab for I-94 travel history, and that's where you will find the airport code for your last date of arrival. But so basically the I-94 website is where you're getting that. Okay. So for item 24, most of you, the answer is going to be F1 student. The only exception is if you actually arrived in the United States in a different immigration status and you did an in-country change of status, your last immigration status upon arrival might have been in a different immigration status. However, for all of you, you should be putting F1 student in item 25, since you would only qualify to apply for post-completion OPT if you're actually an F1 student. Item 26 is your CVIS number that you can pull on your most recent I-20. Item 27, so for all of you that are applying for post-completion OPT, your eligibility code is going to be C3B. And then what you're going to do next is the rest of the questions that you see on this page will not be applicable to you. So item 28, it pertains to individuals that are applying for STEM OPT. So even if you're a STEM major and you plan to apply for OPT, at this point in time, you're indicating NA on item 28, since you're not actually completing that question until you're actually filing your STEM OPT application with the government, which will be at a later time after graduation. So same thing for the rest of this page. Everything else you see on this page does not apply to you. They're all for different eligibility categories of employment, not OPT. So you'll see that in items 30A and down, it only says yes or no. You can't actually check or type NA or none. So these are actually okay to leave blank because you can't type anything in those boxes. So what you're all going to do, so 30D, none of this applies still. This is not a field for post-completion OPT, so I'm putting none. and it's, whoops, I think it skipped ahead. And I'm just gonna, sorry, I'm putting NA here. And you keep doing that until you get to, let's see here, I'm not gonna do NA in every single box, but where you start up again is actually going to be under applicant statement, item 1A on page 4 of the I-765. It's important that all of you are selecting I can read and understand English, since that is required for F1 status. And then if you have an attorney helping you with the application, you would put it in item 2 down here. But otherwise, most of you are gonna write NA in these boxes. Contact information, so you just put in your phone number down here. I know a lot of you are only gonna have a cell phone, so if you're putting your cell phone in item 4, you can put the exact same phone number in item 3 as well. Your email address. Item 6, leave blank. That doesn't apply to anyone that is applying for post-completion OPT. And then we're moving right down to item 7A. So this is a super important field to not forget. You're gonna sign your name, but what you do is fill out the whole form, type it in, and when you're done typing everything, print out the form and actually sign your name in ink. So you wanna make sure you're submitting the ink signature to USCIS, not an electronic or digital signature. And then make sure to date the form. So whenever you sign the form is when you should be dating the form as well. So after that, after you actually sign the form, and super important, don't forget to sign. If you forget to sign, the government will reject the application. Then you can kind of skip ahead to the next page, but just remember, this is kind of where we keep getting asked, do I really have to put an NA in all these boxes? And once again, our recommendation is yes. Just to be safe, you might as well to follow the government's instructions. So I'm not gonna actually do that, but you would complete NA on the rest of this page. Okay, so we're getting close to the end here. Preparer's name, unless you actually have an attorney helping you, once again, none of this page applies, and you're gonna put NA through this entire page. So since I don't have an attorney, I'm gonna skip ahead to the final page of the application. Okay, so depending on your situation, some of you don't need to put anything here. So this is where it is super useful for you to be reading the government I-765 instructions ahead of completing this form, because if you did read those instructions, you'll see that there's an actual section for students applying for post-completion OPT, and the government wants to know a couple things from you. They want to know if you've ever had a previous CVIS number other than what is currently listed on your Form I-20. And they also want to know if you've ever previously been issued CPT or OPT in the US. So not just at your current degree level, but just have you ever been issued CPT or OPT? If the answer is no to all of these, you would simply indicate NA in this section. Now I think it is sufficient enough to just put NA in 1A. You don't necessarily have to put NA in every single box you see here. However, let's kind of go through what you would need to do if you answered yes to any of those questions that I just mentioned. So if you've previously had a different CVIS number, you would fill out your name as it's listed here on your passport. So this is actually one of the examples where my form is not letting me type anything into the name box. And sometimes that just happens depending on what web browser you're using or what application you're using to access the PDF. So in my particular circumstance, what I would do is print out the document once I've typed everything I can in, and then later go in and handwrite my legal name in this box right here. Same thing with alien number, it's not letting me type anything here. But where I can start typing is 3A. So if I had a previous CVIS number, you have to refer to, so it's asking for page number, part number, and item number. So the way you find that, we have to scroll back up to the form, for previous CVIS number. What I'm looking for is, let's see here, the question regarding CVIS number. And I believe it's going to be, here we go. So we're looking for page 3. We're on part 2, which is up here, in item 26, okay? So that's the question about the CVIS number. So what you would do here is you would do page 3, part 2, item 26, and you would basically just write down your previous CVIS number. And whatever that number is, you list that here. If it was at a particular degree level, it may be helpful to list that as well, such as like bachelor's, or if you had a previous J1 status. So another reason you might have had a different CVIS number is if you've ever been in J1 status. But otherwise, the reasons you would have a previous CVIS number are if you've had a gap in your studies of more than 5 months, whether you went to a different school in the United States or even had a gap in studies here at University of Michigan. It's not absolutely required. The government doesn't require that you're putting in documentation of your previous CVIS number, but if you do have documentation to include, such as previous I-20 or DS 2019 with J1 status, it doesn't hurt to include that. So the only time you would fill out something else as well are if you had previous CPT or OPT, and that is also referenced on page 3, part 2, and I'm pretty sure that the question is going to be, yes, item 27. The reason we're referencing item 27 is that's the question that pertains to the post-completion OPT eligibility category, and we're only filling out CPT or OPT info if we are actually applying for post-completion OPT. So if you've ever had previous CPTs, I'm just going to kind of type out the format that we're recommending you list it in. So you want to indicate whether your CPT was full-time or part-time, and that will be listed on your CPT I-20, so it's okay if you're not sure. You're basically just copying the dates that are listed on your CPT I-20. So for the authorization dates, I'm just completely making up these dates here. You just want to type in whatever is reflected on your CPT I-20. And then lastly, you want to put the degree level at which the CPT was issued. If you have more than one CPT, you would list out all of those CPTs down below here in this format. Similarly, if you've ever had OPT, I'm just going to do a new entry here for OPT. You're referencing page 3, part 2, items 27 again. And this is where I would recommend that you actually indicate what type of OPT you've had. So there's 3 different types: pre-completion, post-completion, and STEM OPT. If you're not sure, it should list on your card. And then you want to list out the dates that your OPT was issued through, exactly how they're printed on your OPT card. And then last thing, I do recommend that you're indicating the degree level as well. So that's really the format for what you would be doing if you had a previous CVIS number, previous CPT, or previous OPT. Okay.
Monica, I have a couple questions.
Sure.
What if I'm applying for CPT right now and graduating in December?
Sure. So I would make sure that this information that you're listing on the I-765 form is accurate as of the date you're actually filing with the USCIS. So, for example, if you're mailing your application to USCIS today and your CPT has not yet been issued, you don't need to delay your OPT application filing to get that information. That's okay. You just want to make sure this information is accurate at this point in time. However, if you're getting that CPT authorization issued before you're filing your OPT, then you want to make sure that you are including that information. So just whatever is accurate as of the time you're filing the application.
Okay, and I was admitted to another school which I didn't attend. Should I list that CVIS number too?
I think that's a good idea to include that previous CVIS number. It's sometimes better to disclose it just in case. However, for that particular circumstance, I would actually put an additional comment, since that's what this page 7 is for, is also to put in any special notes and actually indicate did not previously attend this academic program. Okay. Any other questions before we move on?
One student asks, is 4A the specific spot for CPT, or can I just fill this information in 3A
Oh,
if you don't have previous CPT?
Oh, sure. No, 4A is not specific to CPT. The only reason 4A is being used is because I had already used 3D for previous CVIS number, but you can put basically any of that information in any of these boxes. There's no specific order or anything like that. Okay. Were there any other questions in the queue, Ploy?
Not right now.
Okay. So what we'll move on to now, give me a moment. I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint presentation. And we're now really going to talk about what your application is actually going to look like to the U.S. government. So once you've actually prepared your I-765 form, right here you will see the complete checklist of everything you need to include in your packet to the government. Form G1145, we're not actually going to go into that form. It's just a really straightforward form. All it is a form that signs you up for email and text alerts on your case, which we strongly recommend so you can have the most up-to-date information on the pending application. You're including the form I-765, which we already mentioned. So it's important, all of you will have to include 2 US-style passport photos taken within the last 30 days. So that is key. It's really important if you have already used your passport photos for a different application, like your actual passport or a visa application, make sure to get brand new photos since that is something the government will catch. And US-style passport photos is key. So I know a lot of other countries, if you're doing the photos in your home country, a lot of times that size is not going to be the same as here in the US. So just to make sure that you're getting the right format and size for your photos, as long as you're getting them done in the United States, you'll be fine. And then just one last tip about the passport photos. The government processes a lot of documents, so we recommend that you lightly write your name and I-94 number on the back of your photos. And the only purpose of that is if the government drops your photos, you want to make sure that they're matching up your photograph with your actual application. Just make sure that you're writing lightly so that the writing doesn't show on the photo page of your passport. So one thing to also remember is to make sure that you are filing the appropriate application filing fee. Some of you may or may not be aware there's been a lot of discussion about the application filing fee. The government was slated to increase all government, not all, but many government filing fees, including OPT, effective October 2nd. However, due to some pending lawsuit, the government increase for filing fee is on hold. So as of right now, the current filing fee for OPT remains the same, which is $410. However, given that we don't know what the timing or outcome of the government lawsuit will be, I strongly recommend that all of you are referring to the USCIS website immediately before filing, just to make sure that the filing fee hasn't increased. The government website is going to be your most up-to-date source to really make sure you're using the appropriate form edition and the most up-to-date filing fee. Super important, don't include the biometric service fee. Only pay $410. If you include more money or too much money or the wrong fee, the government will reject the application. So make sure you're paying the exact amount. In terms of how you're actually going to pay that fee, there's a couple different options. We recommend that you either use personal check if you have a US bank account. You can get a cashier's check from a U.S. bank, or you could also get a money order. So for example, I know the U.S. Post Office will issue money orders to you. There is an option online to use an online credit card authorization form. If at all possible, we advise against using that form, and that's really because we've seen the most issues with student applications on applications getting rejected with using the credit card form, whereas typically the other three options I mentioned are pretty safe. So moving on, you're also going to include a photocopy of your OPT I-20 that's issued by our office. So make sure you're only sending in the copy, you're keeping the original. And another thing to keep in mind is that the government must receive your OPT application within 30 days of the date that the International Center issued your I-20. So just make sure once you get the OPT I-20 that you're mailing in your application fairly quickly after receiving the I-20. If you realize that your OPT I-20 has expired, it's been beyond 30 days, or you're approaching that 30-day mark, just shoot us an email. We can always cancel and reissue the I-20 for you if needed. So the next thing you're including is copies of all of your previous I-20s from your current degree level. So just keep in mind, if you've had multiple degrees and you're applying at the master's level for OPT, you don't need to include your bachelor's I-20s. The only time you would include I-20 is from a previous degree level, or if you've had CPT from those degrees levels. So it is a good idea to include copies of previous CPTs. Technically, the government doesn't absolutely require it for you to be including those CPT I-20s, but it's not a bad idea. And then if you've had a previous CVIS number, once again, the government doesn't require that you're including the previous I-20s from previous CVIS numbers, but certainly you could do so if you'd like. Okay, so you're including also a copy of your latest I-94. Oh, and here's the website that I was referencing earlier, direct link to the I-94 website, and a copy of your most recent visa. So I would say a common question we get on this is, my visa has expired. Do I still include it? And the answer is yes. Your visa can expire while you're in the US. You just need it on your most recent date of entry. And what the government is looking for is that you were properly admitted and that you did have a recent visa that was valid on your last date of entry into the United States. And then you also want to include a photocopy of your passport ID page. So once again, if your visa is in a previous passport and now you have a new passport, you want to make sure you're including whatever your most recent passport identification page is, including any extension page. You don't need to include the old passport page if your visa was in the old passport. And then the last item you're including is, if you were ever issued a previous EAD card for OPT, you want to include your previous OPT EAD cards and any corresponding OPT I-20s. Okay, so typically, as long as you've compiled all of those documents on the checklist that we just went over, we really don't anticipate issues with the OPT application, but there are some things that can go wrong, and we're just kind of going to go over what those things are, so you can be aware of them, and certainly you can take steps to avoid any issues happening with your application. As I mentioned, this presentation is available online, so I actually recommend, where you see some of these blue words here, these are actually hyperlinks to sections of our website where we outline difficulties with OPT. I do recommend that all of you take a look at our website, but I'll kind of highlight what some of those key takeaways are. And if you do face any issues with the OPT application, we definitely recommend that you reach out to our office to talk to an advisor. And I know, the OPT is a really important application for a lot of you. I know there's probably a lot of anxiety and stress involved. But just remember, most of the difficulties that I'm going to mention can be avoided, and the majority of OPT applications are approved. And based on the recent USCIS numbers, the recent approval rate for OPT in the last 5 years has been 97% approval rate. And the reasons that we typically see for denial of OPT are perhaps that student had had at least 365 days of full-time CPT, which invalidates eligibility for OPT, or possibly they've used OPT at the same degree level as well, which could be a reason for OPT denial if you've already used your full 1 year of OPT at the exact same degree level. So for the most part, we don't anticipate denial of the OPT application. So in terms of what can go wrong with the OPT, I would say the first thing that can go wrong is an actual rejection of the application itself. And that's because it means that your application didn't include every single item that was needed for the OPT application. The number one reason for rejection are issues with payment. So as long as you're properly including the right filing fee, that right away is really going to significantly decrease any chance of rejection. So just make sure you're checking the USCIS website, to make sure you're using the most up-to-date filing fee. And if your application is rejected, I would say a common error we see is that the student right away returns their application back to USCIS with the requested documentation, but they forget that the OPT I-20 still has to be dated within 30 days. So by the time you refile, your I-20 may be expired. So if you do get a rejection, just double check the date your OPT I-20 was issued. If it is beyond or approaching those 30 days, just email our office. We can easily issue an updated OPT I-20 for you. And then another reason for rejection is you simply forgot to include one of the documents that we just went over on our checklist to USCIS. So before you actually mail your application in, just compare all your documents against that checklist to make sure you haven't forgotten anything. So another issue we see with the OPT I mentioned is with the mailing of the EAD. Once in a while, for some reason, the post office will have problems delivering the EAD, and you may see an update online that says that your EAD was returned to the USCIS because it was undeliverable. If that's the case, when you check the status of your case online, you'll also see a special link on the USCIS website to submit an inquiry for your application, and if you follow the prompts, you will actually have the chance to request that the EAD is mailed out to you again. But before you do that, typically we recommend that you call USCIS just to make sure the address on your application is correct. Other things that you may see are receiving a request for evidence from the government, and that's where maybe the government has some additional questions or they'd like some additional documentation from you. So it doesn't mean that your application is going to be denied. Essentially, the government is giving you a chance to respond with additional information. And same thing, if the government has any issues with your application, they could issue, did not mean to click away, they could issue a notice of intent to deny. Not always, but it's often common to receive a request for evidence before a notice of intent to deny. If you receive that, I strongly recommend that you're reaching out to the International Center right away. It's basically, the sooner you can notify our office of an issue, sometimes the easier it is to kind of address or resolve an issue. But the reason we wanted to highlight the RFE and notice of intent to deny is also to highlight the importance of your mailing address. So whatever mailing address you're using on your application, it's also equally important that someone is actually on site to continue to check that mail. Since if you're getting a notice of intent to deny or RFE, the government will allow you a chance to respond, but there's typically going to be a deadline associated with that response. Which is why it's really important that someone is actively monitoring that mailbox. A couple other things that could happen, possibly you could be waiting beyond the standard USCIS processing time for OPT, if your case falls outside of the standard processing time, there is an inquiry that you can submit on the USCIS website to essentially notify the USCIS and request that they speed up that processing. If you receive an application denial, same thing, contact our office as soon as possible. In the event of a notice of intent to deny or denial, we won't actually be able to provide any advice until you receive that denial notice in the mail or whatever letter from the government. So just make sure you're checking that mail frequently. And then last thing, sometimes there are typos on the EAD. If that's the case, depending on the typo, there are different ways to fix it. Sometimes you may have to mail the EAD back to the government. But basically with all of these things that could happen, if you are not sure how to proceed, I would definitely recommend as soon as anything becomes apparent to you, either email our office right away or you can come into drop-in advising and you can discuss with an advisor on what the best steps are for your application. Okay, so one thing I'd like to bring your attention to, so this has not been implemented yet. So as I mentioned, the government was planning to increase their filing fee, but that's on hold. And with that filing fee increase, they were going to start using a different delivery method, a more secure method for OPT EADs to try to avoid some of those mail delivery issues. So this has not been implemented yet. We anticipate it may be in the near future, but something to be aware of is that the government may begin using the signature confirmation restricted delivery in the future as a method of actually delivering your EAD card. And what that means is in the future, they may require a direct signature confirmation as well as presenting a valid ID such as state ID, driver's license, passport to really make sure that the appropriate person is receiving your EAD. So under this new method, if it's implemented, you must be present to sign for your EAD. If you anticipate that you won't be home for whatever reason, there are these forms that you can designate either your apartment community or a friend or relative or whoever else to actually sign for the EAD. Even though the government has not implemented this, just because we don't know when it will be implemented, I strongly recommend that all of you are signing up for USPS informed delivery. And the reason why is that the government will actually be, or the post office will actually be emailing you anytime you're going to get a piece of mail from the US Postal Service. And the benefit of this option is that you can actually get notification that your EAD is en route in the mail before it actually physically arrives at your address. So one, you can take a look and make sure you're going to be home to sign for the package. And if not, through USPS informed delivery, you can also arrange to pick up the package at your US post office. So essentially, if you know you're not going to be around, there's going to be a way to intercept the package before it arrives to try to really streamline that delivery process. So like I said, great tool to do. It's free. I strongly recommend it. Okay, were there any questions before we move on to the travel section of this presentation?
Yeah, so this is back to when you were explaining the last page of the I-765. So students should enter previous CPT and OPTs. How about GSI, like GSI?
No, that's a good question. So even though GSI is a form of on-campus employment, the government is not concerned about on-campus employment. They only want to know about CPT or OPT specifically.
Okay, that'll be all. Thank you.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop my screen share, and my colleague, either Ploy or Jeremiah, are going to hop in with their version and their portion of the presentation.
Okay, all right. Can everyone see my screen? Is that okay? Perfect.
Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about OPT travel while your OPT is pending. So Monica had mentioned previously that you must be physically present in the U.S. at the time of filing OPT for any mailing and the receipt notice for USCIS. So you actually need to physically be here. The International Center's response is we really highly recommend that you do not travel while your OPT application is pending due to a number of risks, which we're going to go through. As soon as my screen will work here. Okay. Hang on a second. Apparently it doesn't want to work. Oh, there we go. All right, spoiler. Okay, there we go. Okay, so first of all, rejection of your OPT application. Obviously, Monica just went through for about an hour how complicated of a process it is. Not super complicated, but how many issues could arise. Imagine trying to solve those issues while being abroad. That could be quite difficult. So that is why we suggest you don't travel while your OPT is pending, just in case of a rejection. Any mail delivery issues with the receipt notice, again, far more complicated if you are traveling. Just in case you get an RFE, a request for evidence, again, far more complicated to solve that issue if you are traveling while it's pending. Always a good reminder, even as an active F1 student, that re-entry into the US is always at the discretion of the border official. What one border official says at one port of entry will be different from what one border official says at another port of entry. So you should always use caution when trying to re-enter the US. And again, if you're applying for OPT and it's pending, that is definitely a risk. And then CBP, so the Customs and Border Patrol, may ask to see the original OPT employment authorization document, what we're referring to as the EAD card, upon entry to the US. So to give you an idea, you are coming in, you're re-entering the US, your OPT is pending, the border official sees that you're entering on an OPT I-20, it's pretty common for them to then ask where your EAD card is. Since your OPT is pending, you will not have an EAD card. So just keep in mind that they may ask for that, and they may deny you entry if you do not have an EAD card, which if it's pending, you will not. And obviously, this goes without saying, there are many COVID-19 travel restrictions, so you should plan accordingly for what those restrictions will be on your ability to re-enter the US. Probably a good idea if life happens and you absolutely must travel while your OPT is pending. It may not be a bad idea to reach out to our office to talk to an international student advisor about that, just so that they can kind of weigh the risks for you, just in case you need to travel. But again, we really don't recommend that you travel while your OPT is pending. If you have to travel while your OPT is pending, we suggest that you bring the following documents with you. So this is pretty standard if you've traveled in and out of the US. If you've traveled in and out of the US during your time as a student, obviously your passport valid for at least 6 months into the future, a valid F1 visa stamp in your passport. Canadians are obviously excluded from that. Your original OPT I-20 with a travel signature, no older than 6 months. So when we issue you, if you've already been issued an OPT I-20 already, you turn it around to the second page and you've noticed we've already given you a travel signature. Up until this point, every travel signature that you've been given as a student has been valid for 12 months. Now that you're on OPT, unfortunately that changes, and it's only valid for 6 months. So please make sure that you check the travel signature on the back of your I-20 to make sure it's still valid and no older than 6 months. Please make sure that you have the I-765 receipt notice, the actual physical receipt notice that they will mail you. That's actually going to be called Form I-797. The email does not count. Please have the physical form. And if you have a job offer letter, if say Microsoft or Amazon or Google or some company has offered you a job, not a bad idea to maybe carry that with you when you try to re-enter the US just to say, hey, I don't have my EAD card, but look, I do have a job with Google starting, December 1st, whatever it may be. If your visa has expired and you need to apply for a new one, there are significant risks associated with international travel. Remember, you can stay in the US on an expired visa. The visa only matters for you trying to get into the US, so don't leave the country unless you have to. So if your visa is expired, don't feel like you need to leave to get it renewed. There are potential visa delays due to security checks. That has been a common theme over the last few years. Visa may be denied without evidence of a job offer. So the consulate or embassy may not choose to give you a visa because you don't have a job offer. They may see no reason to give you a visa to re-enter the US. They may deny you. And of course, check visa appointment availability prior to traveling. You should be doing this all the time anyway, but it's not a bad idea to do it, especially during this time. And of course, again, another reminder about the COVID-19 travel restrictions prior to traveling. So again, the easiest answer to this is it is absolutely in your best interest to not travel while your OPT is pending. And if you have to travel and it's an emergency situation, I would advise reaching out to our office and talking to an advisor so they can kind of walk through the steps with you so that you can understand the risks about trying to re-enter. So congratulations, your OPT was approved. You've got the EAD card, and now you want to travel. So first things first, when you get that EAD card, be sure to check the EAD for accuracy to ensure that there was not a USCIS error, such as a misspelled name, incorrect authorization dates, date of birth, etc. So pretty much take a look at the back of your OPT I-20, double check those dates with the dates for your EAD card. They should roughly be the same. Remember, of course, there's always a chance they could be slightly different, but if you have any questions on that, again, you can reach out to our office. But good idea to submit, to check your EAD card to make sure that it's accurate. And again, take the following documents with you when traveling. I mentioned those earlier. Those same documents apply for when it was approved. And not a bad idea, just the difference will be the job offer letter or an employment verification letter, some type of letter that proves that you're employed or you're going to be employed, just in case there's any issues at the border for re-entry. Okay, so let's talk about reporting your OPT employment information. So your work does not stop. Unfortunately, you've applied for OPT, it's been approved. You still have a lot of work that you need to do with our office in order to make sure that your status on OPT remains valid. So here's the number of responsibilities that you're going to be responsible for moving forward once it's been approved. So first things first, you're going to want to submit a copy of your EAD card to the International Center via our website. Most students just take out their cell phones and snap a photo of the front. That's all we need to see is the front of the EAD card. So just snap a photo and then submit it to the form on our website. Report new OPT employment and any other employment changes via our OPT web form. That's on our website within 10 days of any change. This is a required immigration regulation. So you apply for OPT, your start date is going to be, let's just say, February 1st, and your job with Microsoft is going to start on February 10th. You should be letting us know on February 1st that my job with Microsoft starts on February 10th via our web form and fill out all the details that are required. If, say, in April, that job changes and you no longer work for Microsoft, you should let us know again within 10 days of that change that there's been a change in your employment and you're going to submit that information to our website. Please make sure that all your details on your employment regarding, so you're going to want to make sure to provide details on your employment regarding how the job relates to your degree and what your job duties are. I'm going to give you an example of what not to put in this category. If you are a law student, do not put that I am a lawyer and yes, my job relates to my degree. That is not relevant. That is not what SEVP wants. They want 1 to 2 sentences for each question. So on our OPT web form, we actually break it down into 2 separate questions. So if your degree was in law, you're going to explain how your degree at the law firm or how your job at the law firm relates to your degree. Being a lawyer is not a good answer, so you're going to have to give us a little bit more details. And then, of course, you're going to have to give us details on what your job duties are. Report your employer's worksite address, even if you are working remotely due to COVID-19. So you are, again, working for a law firm. Do not put 123 Main Street, Ann Arbor, apartment 2, if that's your apartment address, even if you're working remotely during COVID-19, or even when COVID-19 is not a thing. SEVP and CVIS, they want your actual employer's address in there. So even if you're working from home, you can add a note when you submit your information to our website, to our web form, letting us know you are working remotely. But residential addresses are not allowed in CVIS as an employer address. So please remember that. We will be emailing you if you submit a residential address. Remember to update your current address and phone number to Wolverine Access within 10 days of any move. Again, keep in mind, CVIS, always the information that you submit to Wolverine Access will then be updated into CVIS, and that information always needs to be updated, so please make sure you're updating that. You will start to receive emails from SEVP regarding the SEVP portal. Just a reminder that the SEVP portal is optional, but it is a way for you to also submit your employer details directly into CVIS. So you can either submit it via the portal, or you can submit it via our website. There is no good way or bad way of doing it. If you submit it via the portal, we don't look at that information. It goes directly into CVIS. If you submit it via us, we're going to double check to make sure everything's correct and email you if there's any issues. So there's no wrong way to do it. If you feel that you would rather do it yourself, you can use the portal. Just note that we do update CVIS records on a weekly basis. So just FYI on that. All right. Continuing with more responsibilities, so just an FYI, you are only allowed a total of 90 days of unemployment on post-completion OPT. So when you get your EAD card and it has the EAD start date and the EAD end date, you can only have a total of 90 days of unemployment between those two dates. So please keep that in mind. Please keep track of your employment information so you don't end up going over that 90 days. That's very, very important. SEVP is now monitoring they've always monitored your CVIS record, but now they're doing it ever more closely. You may receive a letter in the mail, and this is going to be quite the long letter, a notice of failure to report optional practical training employer and exceeding permissible period of unemployment. Try and say that 20 times, that's fun. It'll be mailed to you if you have not reported any employer information and have exceeded the 90 days of unemployment. If you receive this notice, you basically have 15 days to report your employer information, whether that's to the portal or to us. Otherwise, SEVP will set your CVIS record to terminated, which means that's game over. There's nothing we can do about that. We can't reactivate your record. So it is so important, once you get your EAD card, you've got that job offer from Microsoft, Google, Amazon, whatever job you're working, to report that information via our website, via our web form, or via the portal ASAP, so that you don't lose your status. And please don't go over the 90 days of unemployment. Keep track of how many days of unemployment you have, so that you don't go over that. Very important. Keep documentation of all OPT employment information during the duration of your OPT. So any updated OPT I-20s that you may ask from our office, please make sure you're keeping copies of those. Obtain an employment verification letter at the end of your employment that proves that you stopped working for your employer. So again, I'm going to keep using that Microsoft example. You were working for Microsoft, you've got a new job, make sure you get a letter from Microsoft verifying the end of your employment, and make sure you keep copies of that. We don't need to see that. We don't need to see those documentations. That's for you. You keep that documentation. Comply with U.S. income tax requirements and obtain a social security number if needed. As you're working in the United States, you will be required to pay U.S. taxes. please continue to use and check your UMich email account regularly. All of our emails that go to you will continue to be sent via your UMich account. I know that we send a lot of emails. We will continue to send a lot of emails to you, long-winded emails that, you know, seem boring, but they're very, very important. So please read them. And please continue to check your UMich email regularly. And if you need to communicate with our office, please do that via your UMich account and not your work account or your personal email account. Continue to use your UMich account when communicating with us. Let's briefly talk about health insurance coverage on OPT. As you all know right now, you are all required to have health insurance while on active F1 status. This is going to continue while you're on OPT. So there are a couple of options for you moving forward. You can continue to use the U of M International Student Health Insurance policy that you're currently on. The good news is it automatically enrolls. Once you apply for your OPT I-20, you will automatically your insurance will automatically extend to your new end date at the end of your I-20. So that's the good news. You don't need to do anything. You will automatically be enrolled in that. Once you get a job and you want to save some money, you can get onto your employer's health insurance. Keep in mind that even though you're getting your employer's health insurance, you will continue to get charged through U of M's student health insurance policy. So make sure you cancel that. There is a waiver request form. It's called Waiver Request Form OPT on our website. You simply fill that out. It goes to our insurance coordinator in our office, and she will go ahead and cancel your U of M International Student Health Insurance. You could also try to use another alternative private insurance plan. Maybe you have a spouse who has a better insurance and you want to get on their insurance. Same thing would apply. You can submit an insurance waiver form from our website, and we will cancel your U of M health insurance. So if you obtain a new OPT I-20 endorsed for OPT, but you never end up mailing the application to USCIS, please inform the International Center that you're not going to continue on OPT. You will continue to get charged the health insurance. We don't know that you left the country and are done, and you're not planning on applying for OPT. We will continue to charge you insurance for those 12 months. So please let us know right away that you have left the country and you're ending your status. All right, speaking of ending your status, so abandoning OPT. So you're going to want to fill out and submit a departure form for any of the following reasons. So you are departing from the US with no intention of returning to continue your OPT. If you are leaving the US to go visit family and you're planning on coming back to the US to continue your job, you do not need to fill out a departure form. The departure form is for only if you are absolutely 100% sure that you are leaving the US and not returning to continue your OPT. Or you have reached the 90 days of unemployment under OPT. It is better for us to complete your record than it would be for USCIS to auto-terminate your status. So if you are approaching that 90 days of unemployment, you need to start planning on leaving the US ASAP. Go ahead and fill out that departure form, and then you should be planning on leaving the country as soon as possible. So submission of the departure form, again, it will allow the International Center to complete your F1 USCIS record, and it will end your U of M health insurance, thus saving you money and any potential issues with your USCIS record by completing it. So in the case, there are a few cases where you don't want to submit a departure form, and you should contact the International Center if any of these apply to you. You're going to transfer to another institution. So you applied for OPT, you're going to work on OPT for a few months, but then you got into Columbia Law School or another institution, Wisconsin, Ohio State, wherever. Do not fill out the departure form. Instead, you'll actually be transferring your USCIS status to there. You can get in touch with our office and we will transfer your USCIS status to your new institution. If you're changing to any other type of visa status, let us know before you fill out the departure form. So please get in touch with us. Or you're changing your education level at the University of Michigan. So again, you're a bachelor's student. you are doing OPT for a few months before you begin your master's program, you would not want to fill out and submit the departure form, because we're not going to end your record. You're simply changing your education level. So those are the 3 examples of times where you wouldn't fill out a departure form. If this is kind of confusing, and of course it is, all things immigration related are quite confusing. If you're in any one of these situations and you're not sure what option to do, you can always email our office and ask us, and we will direct you as to what the right thing to do is. And I believe that that is it. Are there any questions?
So far, we don't see any questions in the chat, but maybe we'll just hang out for a few minutes, and if anyone has any lingering questions, we can answer those. But otherwise, if you don't have any questions, this presentation is done. Thank you so much for attending, everyone. Like we mentioned before, we'll do what we can to try to get the recording up on the website, assuming that we're not having technical issues with the recording. And if there are follow-up questions, you can always email us at icenter@umich.edu, hop into drop-in advising, which we have every day, and also schedule an appointment as well online.
Okay. So we just want to end it here? Oh, okay.
So there was something about STEM. So this workshop only pertains to post-completion OPT. We don't cover STEM in this workshop. If you're interested in learning more about STEM, I would simply recommend searching for STEM OPT on our website. And we do have a section of our website that tells you about STEM, STEM eligibility, how to apply. And you can always, contact our office directly as well. In the future, we might launch a STEM workshop, but that will be in the works.
Somebody messaged me privately, but he asked, how long does the entire process take, especially if I'm outside of the US right now?
Sorry, Boy, can you repeat that?
Yeah. How long does the entire process take if I'm outside of the US right now?
Sure. So the OPT I-20 process is 1 to 2 weeks with our office. The actual filing with the government, once it's filed, the processing times range. Currently, I believe it's 2 to 5 months for adjudication. However, like I mentioned before, if you're not currently in the US, the government typically does require that you're actually physically present in the US to be eligible to file for OPT. So, how long your process would take, I would recommend that you are requesting that OPT I-20 from our office closer to when you plan to be physically present in the US. And that timing will be dependent on whenever you're able to physically arrive.
I think I saw Tristan asked in the comments if he would get the OPT workshop completion. I think he's referring to the one that's done through the Canvas. So I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify for everyone here, the OPT online workshop is a separate workshop that everyone has to take to apply for their OPT I-20. That OPT online workshop is on our website, our OPT section page. So once you do the OPT online workshop, you'll get a completion email, but that's not part of this workshop. This workshop is more of a supplemental workshop to prepare students for filing. If you're looking for the OPT completion email, you'll have to take the online tutorial through our OPT page.
And then I just add, I think the goal is, so a couple things. First of all, the PowerPoint presentation is on the events page on our website. So where you signed up to be on the workshop today. So there should be a copy of the PowerPoint presentation on our webpage. And then secondly, regarding, hopefully there's no technological issues because we've stumbled across that the last few recordings. As long as everything looks good on this webinar, we will probably post that on the same link to our website. So where you signed up for this presentation will likely be where the recording is. I don't have a time frame from when that will be on, so just check back periodically, but hopefully we'll double check the recording, make sure it's good. If it looks good, we'll go ahead and post that to our website, hopefully on the same page where you signed up for the presentation.
Okay, and I see there's a question about leaving the US. Once you have the EAD, can you come back? So once you have the EAD, so while it's not an absolute required document for reentry, we do recommend that you have a job offer. And if you have that, we recommend bringing that job offer letter with you. And you'll also need your standard documents for reentry, your OPT I-20, valid passport, valid F1 visa. But if you have those documents, you should be able to come back as long as you're not from a country that is subject currently to the COVID-19 travel restrictions. Currently, the countries on that list are China, Brazil, and Iran. I think there's a question regarding how long the Canvas workshop completion email is valid for. Typically, we recommend that workshop should be issued, that email should be issued within 4 months of you applying for your OPT I-20. I don't think we're necessarily sticklers about that exact 4-month time frame, but generally speaking, it should be issued within the last 4 months. Tristan, I see there's a question regarding the requested OPT start date. So that's exactly right. The requested OPT start date is just a recommendation to the USCIS. Ultimately, dependent on the government processing time, that start date is subject to change. So if the government approves your OPT application before your requested start date, you should always get your requested start date. However, if the government approves your EAD or OPT application after your requested start date, they're going to adjust the start date to the actual approval date. So if it takes the government a little longer to process your OPT EAD, you're not necessarily going to know the date, your actual OPT EAD start date, until you receive that EAD card in the mail. Okay, so I think that wraps up the questions. Oh, there's one more here. And I think we will land with Kejun as the last question of the day. So if anyone does have follow-up questions, like I said, feel free to shoot us an email. But Kejun, looks like you are graduating end of April next term and received a job offer for February 2022. Will I be So for you, so one thing to keep in mind with your graduation timeline, the latest start date you can request will be June 29 of 2021. That's going to be the end of your 60-day grace period. And you're only allowed up to 90 days of unemployment. So based on that time frame, if you are issued the June 29th start date, keep in mind to maintain your F1 status, you would essentially have to begin working by towards the end of September of 2021 to avoid accruing those 90 days of unemployment. You know, one thing that some students may do if you're struggling to find a job offer, one, you could either find a different job offer in the meantime before February 2022 to avoid accruing those 90 days of unemployment. If you are struggling to find a job offer, one thing you may want to consider is that unpaid employment is still considered employment for OPT purposes, for the purposes of maintaining your immigration status. So for those students that are struggling to find an offer of employment, one thing you may want to consider, many students choose to reach out to their professors here at the university to see if anyone needs help, even doing research, whether paid or unpaid, or whatever help a professor may need, and as long as that doesn't violate any labor laws, and that's something you need to discuss with the HR department, you could potentially do even unpaid employment and still be considered employed under OPT. For further questions about that, certainly don't hesitate to reach out to our office. Okay, So I think we'll leave it here for today. So thank you so much for joining, everyone.